This week on Storyboard 18, we decode what Shubhranshu Singh calls the physics of advertising. The world's biggest agency networks, once capitalism's conscience and chorus, are facing a brutal market verdict. Their creativity no longer compounds like code, and their empires of manpower are being outpaced by systems that learn. What went wrong with the great brand builders of our time? Can creativity reinvent itself for the algorithmic age? I'm joined by Shubhranshu Singh, marketing leader and columnist, to discuss why the industry that once taught the world to differentiate has itself become undifferentiated, and what it will take for storytelling to scale again. Thank you for joining me on the show, Shubhranshu. Brilliant to have you here with me again.
Thank you, Dilshad. As always, delighted to be here.
And I'm going to just go straight to the point. You sort of spoke about some uncomfortable truths in your column. What made you write it in the first place? What was the this provocation? What drove it? Was it frustration with what you saw, or was it a sort of call to arms?
I think the latter. I think I'm an eternal optimist, as you may well know, Dilshad.
Yes.
So there's no question of frustration. And I have been writing about this for a very long time now, the arrival of the digital disruption, the now ubiquitous presence of agentic AI, infinite creative in infinite forms. This is important to advertising as such. And the holding company, the form that these agglomerations have taken, is only a recent phenomenon in the grand sweep of history. But advertising is, in our society, from times immemorial, and it's very important because it's the language of capitalism. Advertising is the bridge between the buyer and the seller. Advertising also, very preciously, though rarely, is the creator of culture. So now, if a business model fails, and as a consequence, the service that they provide to society fails along with it, it is a very dire consequence. And so we have been discussing this in the tribe of marketeers. We have had a very, very close symbiotic relationship with agencies. I began life at Hindustan Lever in 1999, so I have seen the entire evolution in this present millennium. And I feel things are now reaching a stage where if corrective actions are not taken, the world as we know it now, agency, media, content, influencer, advertiser, and the consumer, that equation will get changed forever, and it may not be for the better, which is what drove me to write this.
It certainly ruffled a lot of feathers and rankled a lot of people, but we won't get to, we'll talk about that a bit later. But coming to, why this happened, Shubhranshu, why did the people that were supposed to be, the champions and the aces at communication fail to really communicate their value proposition? What happened?
Firstly, it's very gratifying that it rankled a lot of people. What's a column without a poke? I think, to your question, the business model is essentially a legacy business model. And the arrival of the holding company, which happened in the last 40 to 50 years, actually it began with Marion Harper and resulted in what is now called the Interpublic Group, IPG, in the 60s, but very famously driven by the force of nature, Sir Martin Sorrell and WPP. This conglomerate, as its present form, holding companies sweeping from PR on the one hand to media planning and servicing on the other, all nature of advertising services being accommodated under one roof. This was a financially great model, but it also led to the financialization of creative duties. And what has happened, therefore, is as the digital tornado hit town, it led to an emasculation of those who created content. Basically, and I've written about this in Storyboard, I call it Go Me's on Talk. Google, Meta, Amazon, and TikTok. Out of $1 trillion of advertising outside of China, they take $700 billion. Naturally, they took it only from legacy media. The gain loss was very clear. Once $700 billion of joy flows out of legacy media, it's a downward spiral. Because remember, advertising is a value exchange. Consumers put up with advertising so as to get subsidized or even free content. And once that amount of value flows out, then the resulting model is on refining the poorer alternatives. And that's not good for society, that's not good for brand building, That's not good, I would say, for democracy, because even getting a vote is a marketing exercise at the end of the day. So the reason why this model of holding companies is progressively been in trouble is, firstly, it does not differentiate between service and a system. Each era, Dilshad, has its governing logic. You have to follow the money. The industrial era was about scaling up efficiency. The information era was about scaling up reach. The algorithmic era was about self-learning systems. But the AI era, the cloud capital era, as Yanis Varoufakis famously called it, is about things that grow while you sleep. So it is about accretive models. It's about owning intellectual property. It's about owning data. It's about proprietary frameworks. It is no longer about taking a brief, renting out a bench of people who are good at developing content and finishing the campaign, or even a retainer model. So you have to distinguish that the service model no longer works, but the system model is hugely rewarding, gets you huge multipliers in terms of valuation. And this is where I think the holding companies have missed the bus a little bit.
There was a great line in your piece. You wrote that agencies built empires of manpower, not memory. Elaborate a little bit on that. You touched upon on the idea of them thinking like service providers and not product creators, for instance. Talk about this. Building empires of manpower versus empires of memory.
Yes. Well, in my humble opinion, it is subject worthy of several PhDs, not one. But let me attempt an arc. See, earlier the model was very simple. You were given a brief, you made a campaign, the top advertisers got top creative talent and attention because they got, say, 15% on the media spends as commission. The model was pristinely applicable to the media industry, which was then thriving. Why? Because the commission was paid by the media entity to the creative. So there was no skin off the client's back. And then you got 15, 16, at times 17+% of production service fees. That was enough on the plate for everybody. And then came this thing about we will be analyst and artisan. We will be producer and promiser. We will be all things to people, east and west. We will be media analysts and we will also be content producers. And then they started shoehorning a variety of functions inside the boundaries of one organization. That model floundered a little bit for the simple reason that everybody wanted in the game. So consultancies arrived for business transformation, creative mavens arrived as consultants, influencers arrived riding the mobile phone. So everybody who had a mobile phone was suddenly a creator, a producer, and an influencer. And I would counter the logic by saying there are so many influencers who are not influential, and yet they are influencers. So everybody was in the game, right? So what was a military parade suddenly became a dance floor. And so if you didn't have permanent partners, you were dancing with somebody you didn't know. And to get permanent partners, you had to be worthwhile, which means you had to have a return on investment, which is where procurement came in. And this is about the time that marketing globally lost its nerve a little bit. Traditionally, Dilshad, there were 4 Ps: product, place, price, and promotion. My wager is that not many CMOs have any role to play when it comes to the first 3. You have to price it based on the business model. You have to have the entire addressable market, so all places are good. You have the product, and the product is what the product is. And then you have promotion, and that's where the CFO arrives. And so suddenly, something which is value accretive, which is actually going to produce the reason why people prefer you, has instead become half a procurement line in a massive CFO Excel sheet. And the CMO is looking to build brand, procurement is looking to cut cost, and the model is mutually irreconcilable. In his book, Future Shock, Alvin Toffler wrote that whenever an industry is bombarded with change, they lose their nerve because of the premature arrival of the future. So I would say that the future was a long time coming, but as it stands, it is the premature arrival of the future, and the holding company is still in the legacy model of renting out people, taking retainer fees, thinking ideas, not owning the IP, but giving it on a velvet-lined tray to the client.
Absolutely. There are some fantastic analogies there as well. But just zooming in on the technology aspect, Shubhranshu, I mean, it essentially has turned creativity into code, and it's about algorithms today optimize, it's attention and not art. So advertising honestly and truly is stuck in this paradox where it's attempting to scale its art and its form and its craft. So there's this constant battle going on. How do you see things playing out? And we'll come specifically to the holding companies and the agency networks. But what do you see playing out currently?
Yeah. Again, I think that's a very fascinating area, and we have engaged on this, and I've written for you on this. There are two things that's happening. Potted plants can seem very large, right? But they're not trees in the forest. They don't derive sustenance for themselves. And a lot of the agency work that happens for clients has become potted plant kind of creative, which means you need to constantly water it. The day there's no media money backing it, it just disappears as a happy or a bad memory. Now, the reason why these are actually mutually contradictory, on the one hand, the very word agency means you're acting on behalf of the client for areas where they may or may not have expertise. So you are agentic in the sense that you have custodial responsibilities and you are acting on the behest and on behalf of the client. Whereas today a holding company is actually saddled with quarterly, weekly, even daily targets, clicks, likes, and so on. Now, digital is also a bit of a conjurer's trick. On the one hand, it has led to constant fragmentation. No digital is mass. All digital is technically 1:1. But at the same time, it has led to huge aggregation. So there are these platforms, again, Google, Meta, Instagram, and so on, who rule the roost. So you are template ridden. You don't own the intellectual property. You are fed algorithmically, and that injection is beyond your control. So what is the answer? The answer to my mind is holding companies need to start owning IP, not bodies. They need to own proprietary data frameworks. They need to have models that scale up on context, not on content. Yeah, because context scale up can technically be infinite. Content scale up is only as much as the paid push will get you. And really, I am a big cynic when it comes to organic virality. You know it, I know it, and the viewers know it. How much of virality is paid for and given a twirl, and how much of it arrives genuinely because people love it is a subject for another debate altogether. But in this digital era, the way out to a flourishing future is to think of data, to think of design, and to think of delegation. You cannot own everything under one roof. You have to become orchestrators, not owners. That is the difference.
Amazing. Well put on that front. But okay, let me ask you this then. Do the current holding companies have the appetite, or even the language for that matter, for this transformation and for this need for their survival period?
Well, the issue that faces the holding companies, because they think of time and material and people, is pretty much the same that governs the logic for IT services companies, for instance. And that's why you're seeing people being let off, code being invaded by artificial intelligence, and so on. If you start thinking of yourselves as system developers and systems which actually reach out to billions of individual consumers and scale up, you are in good health. If you think of yourself as a make-do shop, as in somebody gives you an order to make something, you make it and you do that task and take money for it, you're in trouble because that task will be done faster, more flawlessly, and more repeatedly by automation than by human beings, and that future is already here. So my view is that the perspective change is more important than the design change, and the last thing we need is another agency model. Because as it is, from a client side, I can say, having been a CMO since 2011, it is difficult. There is a cost to the complexity of handling a consultant, a data analyst, a digital shop, a PR firm, a creative duties firm. And very often, individual agencies because of a variety of reasons, not the least of it was jealousy, said, oh, we want to be pure. So if I do brand A in auto, I promise you I will not do brand B in auto. Well, that logic doesn't hold for consulting organizations. Consulting organizations are preferred because guess what? They do brand A, B, C, D, E, all in auto. So they say, oh, they have a flourishing auto practice. But this is not the case in creative agencies. They say, oh, you work with A, B won't give you business. That era, that definition, those boundary lines, those governing logics also have to mutate and change forever.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to sort of, stick your neck out a little bit and tell me, out of the holding companies that you see, we spoke about WPP from the Martin Sorrell era. Very different WPP. Now, of course, it's going into this sort of consolidation phase. So is it with the other large holding companies. Publicis did this about 5 years ago, and they're currently sort of bearing the fruit or the challenges of that as well. Then you have Omnicom and IPG, you have Havas, and then you have Dentsu, which is in a bit of a dire state. So, in this scenario, who do you think is best placed to capture some of these new model-led growths?
Dalsha, that's a tricky question, and I'm not a betting man, but I can tell
but
you
if you were a betting man.
Well, the numbers are clearly on the table. I think Publicis has stolen a march over the rest. We will wait to see what the IPG-Omnicom merger brings about. There will be a reshuffle in terms of the pecking order, but clearly, and hats off to Maurice Levy, I think tenure matters a great deal as well, right? England became the ruler of the world because of succession of 3 monarchs ending with Elizabeth I. Same for the Ottoman Empire. So if you have long tenure at the top, you live through many cycles, and I think Maurice Levy was able to do that at Publicis, had the foresight to make investments in digital, first-party data, proprietary frameworks, and as you are correctly saying, it's bearing fruit. But I would wager that the very interesting model to watch is Accenture. I think Accenture has the computing clout, it has the AI friendliness, and it has ingested into Accenture song some really terrific creative talent as well. So while we are talking about these 4 and their total net worth today put together, and I don't follow it on a daily basis, but is in the ballpark of $50 to $60 billion, with Publicis being the leader, if you put that next to a tech list which starts at 4 trillion, they would pale into insignificance. But it's one thing to see market value, and it's the other thing to see a sustainable business model. I would say Publicis is in a very strong position, and I would say Accenture or likes of Accenture are a model to closely watch.
One final question on this subject for now, Shubhranshu. Do you think, in this world that we are currently living in, driven by algorithms, this attention economy, obsessed with metrics, do you still think there is room for imagination? Scaling imagination, I don't know, it's a slightly philosophical question here. But given that you, like you said, you're an eternal optimist, what's your take on it?
No, I think the marketeers have the best chance of survival. And the reason for that is it's still artificial intelligence, not as much artificial imagination. So if there is going to be virtue in having a human in the loop, my bet is that human is going to be an imaginative type rather than a rational type, because the rational piece is going to be done so much better by computing power. And the other thing about it is there are autonomic responses and there are involuntary responses. If I talk to you about yawning, you will yawn, and if I show you an Excel sheet that has $1 billion on it, it will not give you goosebumps. Erector pili, the muscle which twitches to create a goosebump, is beyond human control, but emotion does it. So I am saying when everything else is gone, emotionality, the reason for subjective referencing, and most importantly, bringing a smile to somebody's face, the algorithm can give you a predictive quotient for it, but it cannot make the content that makes that goosebump happen. So my bet is that if there are humans in the loop, it will be right brainers and it will be marketers.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me, Shubhranshu.